everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Logos, the life of light, love, and logic. And this is episode 4. In episode 4, we're going to be looking at the beginning of God's creation. Just as a review, we want to talk about how the Logos is the spoken word or discourse that gives structure and order. In episode 3, we looked at how the Creator, or God, is the Logos. He exists, and He's light, all knowledge, all wisdom, all powerful, immortal, and invisible. It was He who created this world and universe and cosmos by His will and for His pleasure. So if He created this world by His will and for His pleasure, He's the one who should receive the glory and honor and credit for His creation. So therefore, the focus is upon God, the Logos, who created this for His pleasure. That should be the focus rather than the focus being upon ourself and our will. We also talked about in episode 3 how in the beginning is a reference to when God set forth to start His creation. So as we go into episode 4 today, we've got two main objectives. One is, how can we trust the journal of God's creation and account of His interaction with His creation? And what makes the Bible valid, meaning the strength of its measurement and relevance? What makes the Bible reliable? Is it consistent? So that's the first objective we want to look at today. Secondly, we want to begin to look at the foundation of God's artwork or His creation. As we begin to study the description of the Logos interacting with His creation, how do we know that this description is true, valid, and reliable? So think about it. The description and recording of God's interaction with His artwork is a compilation of 66 different books penned by 40 or more different authors over a period of 1,500 years. This compilation of books is collected and assembled in what we call today the Holy Bible. So we have to ask ourselves, how do we know that this compilation of books over 1,500 years, how do we know that it's reliable and true? So the first thing we want to look at is the validity of the scriptures. Validity refers to the proper alignment and soundness to a plumb line of what's being measured or discussed. We all should know what a plumb line is. It's basically used to draw straight lines for something, used a lot of times in construction or carpentry work. So essentially with validity, we're asking ourselves, do I measure or evaluate what I purpose to measure or evaluate? Do I stay true to the plumb line? Do I stay within the lines here of what I'm intending to do? So for example, from a scientific perspective, validity refers to the alignment of the research with the stated objective and purpose. Is this relevant and true to the research? Does this information measure what I claim or what I say it's going to measure? So let me use this for an example. If I'm doing research on the impact that classical music might have on how well plants grow, which actually is a study that was been done years ago. I'm sure there was a reason for it. Does classical music help plants grow better? I think there's been studies done on does rock music and heavy metal music help plants grow better too? But let's suppose that's my study. If I say I'm going to measure the effect of classical music upon the growth of plants, I've got to make sure that I control as many variables as possible, that I eliminate as many distractions as possible to give me as accurate of a statistical measurement as possible that I can get. So for example, I've got this experimental group with plants and I am playing classical music in the background for a period of 2 or 3 months, and we're going to measure how high the plants grow or how much fruit that these plants produce. And then of course, I obviously am going to have a control group with the same types of plants, but there's no classical music in the background. One of the things I have to be careful about is, am I really guarding my variables? Am I really guarding the environment to make sure I measure what I'm trying to measure? So for example, if in my experimental group, I'm also watering it 4 or 5 times a day, maybe pouring a little bit of Miracle Grow upon it, but the control group, which has no classical music, if I only water it once a day and do not give it Miracle Grow, at the end of the experiment, if the experimental group has really tall plants and the control group has really small plants, my conclusion probably isn't valid because I've not controlled all the variables. I've not controlled all the situations. If it's valid, I really try to measure what I say I'm going to measure. I'm going to make sure that everything is equal in both groups, whether it's the experimental group or the control group. Everything's equal. except for the playing of classical music. So that's the key thing. Am I measuring what I say I'm going to measure? If so, that brings about some validity. I've got a point here about consider why is political polling so bad? Okay, as I'm taping this program, we are in the we're trying to wrap up the 2020 election, and as you look back to the 2016 presidential election and the 2020 presidential election, one of the things that's really stood out is I guess, the failure of political polling. I think there's just been a lot of people concerned about political polling and how it's just really flopped in 2016 and 2020. So a lot of people would say political polling doesn't seem to be very valid because what they say they're measuring, it doesn't seem like they're measuring it very well. And of course, there could be various reasons for that. They could be asking really bad questions. They may not be asking the right kinds of people. They may not be getting a very good sample group. Their sampling group may be askew, messed up. It's possible, some theorize, that maybe political polling isn't really out to measure how people are going to vote. It may be more so there's an agenda behind it, that maybe it's being used to try to get people to vote a certain way, to follow the crowd. So again, if it's valid, it should stick to the plumb line. It should stay true to the measure of what it's supposed to measure and not deviate from that. Now, when we talk about from an argumentative or a persuasive perspective, validity again refers to the strength of my comment or my argument to the topic. Am I using information that's pertinent and germane to the topic of the discussion or debate? So for example, if I'm discussing the merits of capitalism over socialism or communism, do my points of argument support the successes or the factual values of a capitalistic society? Do my points illustrate the documented failures of communism or socialism? If so, then my points are valid to the topic. I'm staying true to the plumb line. Typically, we say if we use reasonable or factual information regarding a particular topic, whatever it is, our discussion tends to be valid. And you hear people say that sometimes. Well, that's a valid point. What makes it a valid point? It's valid because it pertains to the topic of discussion at hand. It supports and measures what we say we're discussing. However, in debate or persuasion, many times people resort to emotionalism and personal attacks. Sometimes we refer to this as attacking the straw man, where instead of dealing with the topic at hand, we begin to attack the messenger and find flaws with him and make him look bad, and we totally ignore the points of discussion. This typically is not what we'd call validity. Emotionalism many times does not measure what we claim to measure. It tries to stir up and persuade people without using any kind of validity. And we see this a lot in politics. Discussion centers around attacking a person rather than logically discussing and validating what a candidate's policies are, and are they the best for a group of people. Politicians spend a lot of time, it seems like in today's world, attacking the opponent rather than focusing upon factual and informative effects of their policies and beliefs. Therefore, debates many times are not so much about looking at policies and ideas more than it is trying to emotionally stir up feelings for or against a candidate. That's why I've always said I don't know if I would make a very good politician, because I would probably be a kind of politician that would say, here are the issues, here's where I stand on the issues. I believe this, this, and this. I will support this, this, and this. I will vote this way. I will be against this. I will not support this. Here's the issues. Here's where I stand on them. And if you like what I believe, vote for me. And if you don't like what I believe, if you don't agree with what I believe, then vote for the other guy. To me, politics should be that simple. Unfortunately, that's not how politics work. So people jump in and they start, rather than focusing on the issues and being valid and staying true to the plumb line, they actually get caught up in, well, he's ugly, or he's fat, or he's not very good, or I don't like him, or he's rotten, or he's got this skeleton in his closet. And so people get caught up in the emotionalism and many times forget about, are we actually staying true to the topic? So keep in mind, as we kind of wrap this part up, in order for my discussion or argument to be valid, it needs to pertain to and measure the claimed objective. This requires honesty and objectivity. And I want you to think about that. To be valid means I have to stay true to the plumb line. I have to measure what I say I'm going to measure. And again, this requires a lot of honesty and objectivity. As people, we tend to go into things sometimes with certain biases, with certain preconceptions, and sometimes we want to prove our point rather than stay true to the point. People who work with honesty and objectivity stay true to the point, and many times are we can have information brought to us that may actually change our minds or that may actually enlighten us onto something. So I think validity involves a lot of honesty and objectivity. I think that's why sometimes in our culture there are certain topics that are controversial. I threw out a couple like global warming, the coronavirus lockdowns. Again, as I'm taping this, that's a controversial topic, and I think one of the reasons those issues are controversial is that sometimes people think there's a lack of honesty and objectivity to these topics. And anytime you don't have honesty and objectivity where you say, I'm going to stay on topic, I'm going to measure what I say I'm going to measure, I think when people don't see that, it lends to a lack of credibility or a lack of validity. So that brings us to the question. We've talked about validity. Are the scriptures valid? What's validity? Does it stay true to what it says it's going to measure? Does it stay true to the plumb line? What's the Bible try to measure? What's the Bible try to proclaim? Basically, the scriptures focus on God's relationship with his creation, and in particular, his relationship with man. If that's the objective, if that's the point of discussion, if that's the focus, of course the scriptures are valid, because that's what scriptures do. They explore the relationship of God and mankind. The scripture focuses on God's outreach to mankind, mankind's reaction to God, and then God's response to mankind's reaction. And we see that all throughout scripture. So therefore, scriptures are valid in the sense that they stay true to its purpose. Now, there are people who try to make the Bible seem invalid, and their argument is that information from the Bible doesn't seem to line up with their views of biology or sociology or logic or reasonableness or geography or history or whatever. One of the things we have to keep in mind is the purpose of the scriptures is not necessarily to be a world history book or a biology book or a geology book or a book on automobile repair. It's about relationship with God and God's interaction with his creation. In that sense, the Bible is quite valid and to the point. But now, having said that, I also want to emphasize that the Bible, the context of the Bible, is validated by other disciplines. So when I'm not trying to be light when I say the Bible's not an auto mechanics book or the Bible's not a computer science book. It's not necessarily a biology book. But at the same time, there's nothing in the scriptures that would, I guess what I'm trying to say is, even when you start piling it up and putting it up to other disciplines, the Bible is very valid. Now, the one issue that people do struggle with sometimes is when you look at the miraculous or supernatural interactions or interventions of God with mankind. Because when we talk about miracles or miraculous supernatural interventions, which is something we're going to talk about in a later program, we're dealing outside sometimes the realm of logic, and we're going to explain miracles and supernatural interventions in another episode. But if we could actually not remove, but if we could even just set aside, if people, even people who struggle with miracles and supernatural things that God does, that doesn't seem logical, if we could even just pull those and just set those aside for a second, if we could look at the rest of the Bible, there's nothing in the Bible that doesn't line up with accurate knowledge in other disciplines. So for example, I've got a list here: biology, the reproduction and health systems of life. Those factual things about biology, those, well received and well documented things about biology, there's nothing in the Bible that goes against that. Now, there's concepts in biology that are just theoretical. For example, a lot of evolutionary thinking, which is just theoretical. It's not factual, even though there's people out there who present it as factual. It's not factual, okay? It's just theoretical. Yes, maybe the Bible seems against that, but general principles of biology, there's nothing incongruent about the Bible and biology. There's nothing incongruent about geological information and the scriptures. There's nothing incongruent about history. the history of mankind over the last 6,000 years in the Bible. And we can go through geography, psychology, parenting skills, relationship skills, cosmology, the arrangement of the heavens, philosophy, the purpose and value of existence. All these things the Bible validates, and these things validate the Bible. Another one I have on here I think that's very interesting is genealogy, the history of man and who produced who and who descends from who. When you look at the origins of the nations and ethnic groups, there's a lot of validity. These two areas, the Bible and genealogy, highly validate each other. In fact, if you ever get a chance, this book is out of print, but James Anderson back in 1732 wrote the Royal Genealogies. Now, Anderson was a Scottish bishop, and he went to a lot of work. And what he did is, in his day and age of 1732, he actually took some of the rulers of the world and he documented through genealogy, he documented them back to the time of Noah's sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And so that's a phenomenal work because, again, it's an ancient work, but he actually took the time that genealogically he could prove how Scripture was in line with the history and genealogy of man. So is the Bible valid? Yes. The next question we ask, is the Bible reliable? Reliability refers to the consistency and trustworthiness of an idea or person. So think about it in relationship terms. A reliable person is someone that you can count on in various situations over time to exhibit a particular response or attitude. It's consistency. So if I encounter this person at event A, and he's always on time, an event B and he's on time, an event C and he's on time, an event D and E and so on, and he's always on time, that person develops a sense of reliability. I can count on that person's consistent about being on time. And so I can with confidence predict he'll always be on time or should always be on time. And reliability works the other way. If I push this person's buttons in situation A and they yell and scream at me, and I push their buttons again in situation B and situation C and situation D, and I get the same response, that's a reliable response. I can with confidence predict they're probably going to react a certain way if I push their buttons. So again, reliability refers to consistency. So from a scientific perspective, reliability refers to the extent to which a study or experiment can be duplicated or replicated by another person or another group, and they'll get similar results or consequences. Think about, again, at the time of this taping, the vaccines for the coronavirus are going to be distributed shortly. Okay? When we talk about vaccines, why do people take vaccines? Because vaccines, there's different trials. They have several trials to confirm that this is probably going to be the response of this vaccine. So we test a group of people, we record what kind of side effects, what kind of reactions they have, then somebody duplicates that trial, that experiment, and somebody duplicates that, administers that vaccine another time, and there can be sometimes many trials before a vaccine is approved. But once we approve it, people with a strong degree of confidence can typically say, hey, if you take this vaccine, yeah, your arm may be a little bit sore. In the case of the coronavirus, there may be other things like a headache or some pain here, but it's only going to last a day or two. And basically the vaccine, then, you're inoculated against the coronavirus in the future or whatever. So again, there's some reliability. That's why people take vaccines. From a perspective of sharing ideas or arguments, information is reliable if the points that I make can be argued and debated and shared by other people, and that information would produce similar results to what I argue. There's a consistency. So for example, I'm just going to use the scripture for example. In the scripture, it says that harsh words stir up anger, but a gentle word can break a bone. So that's a principle that if I apply it, and then if you apply it, and this person applies it, and this person applies it, and we get similar results, there'd be reliability. And I think there is a great deal of reliability because we find out that this is just the way it is. If somebody's angry and I cuss them out or I get mad back at them, what does it tend to do? It tends to exacerbate the situation. It's like throwing gas on a fire. It tends to become explosive. But if somebody's upset or disgruntled and I go and I exhibit compassion or humility or try to understand them, usually that diffuses the situation. So again, you try that, I try that, this person tries that, and we get similar results. That would be considered reliability. We can reliably determine that a heavily socialistic or communistic economic and social system may have certain economic and social effects. So, for example, that's one of the things we're going through in America at this time. There's this kind of undercurrent of people wanting to move towards a more socialistic society, and I think some people would say, "Hey, look, we can look at countries like Venezuela, Cuba, the former USSR, North Korea, China, some of these countries that have had heavily socialistic or communistic economic and social systems, and it seems like they all have similar traits, whether it's economic struggles, whether it's lack of personal freedom. This is what tends to happen, kind of like the old adage of Margaret Thatcher's infamous quote about the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. And so that tends to be a fairly reliable trait that tends to happen with people who experiment in that area. We also can probably reliably determine that certain economic practices enhance the economy. Typically, the less government regulations, the lower taxes you have, people are a little more free to become entrepreneurs and risk takers and try to help the economy out. So again, reliability is multiple incidences of getting consistent or somewhat consistent results. So the question is the Bible reliable? Can we take the principles, relationship skills, promises, commands of the Bible, and can it be consistently applied to additional experiences or experiments? And the obvious answer is yes. And that's because there's testimonies of millions of people over the last 6,000 years, testimonies of millions and millions of people who have had some interaction with the scriptures and the promises and the principles, and they've ended their life with a sense of satisfaction and hope and fulfillment that the promises and principles and encouragement provided in scriptures help them. In fact, I would have to say I've never heard of anyone who has consistently, somebody who has stayed true to their faith and persevered in their faith and the promises and examples and principles of scriptures, who at the end of their life expressed any kind of disappointment or dissatisfaction. I'm not aware of anybody. And if you as a listener are aware of somebody who lived their whole life true to the scriptures, faith in God to the end of their days, and said at the end of their days, man, that was a waste of my time. I was stupid for doing that. I was a fool for doing that. Please share that with me, because I'd love to talk to that person and get their perspective. But I don't know of anybody personally. I've never heard of anybody who experienced the scriptures and stayed true to the scriptures and persevered to the scriptures, who at the end of their life felt like there was not some sense of fulfillment and hope from that. Now, I've heard of people, in fact, there's many instances of this, of people who maybe thought they had some faith, maybe did have some experience of faith, but did not persevere in that faith, or they let that faith slip away. I've heard of people there who have maybe resisted the scriptures, maybe knocked the scriptures, maybe ignored the scriptures. I mean, obviously there are people who are atheistic or skeptics or agnostics, and some of these people have had, quote, religious experiences in the past. But again, they did not keep their faith. They did not persevere in their faith. So really, they lack any credibility or validity to really knock the Bible, because they didn't actually stick with it to really hold on to the promises and see the consistency of the Bible. And I've got here in my notes that would be a lot like somebody who never earned a college degree criticizing those who furthered their education. There's really no validity there, because they've not experienced that. They've not stayed true to that measurement. Or if someone who, if you mock people who are out exercising, trying to look after their health, but you never exercise, your arguments against that are not very valid, because you've not experienced that. You're not in the knowledge of that. And so basically the point is, if someone can't run or finish the race, they don't have the authority or credibility to make comments about the prizes received at the end of the race. So is the Bible true? What is truth? Truth is that which is. It's that which exists, that which is real, which is authentic. There's no falsehood, there's no deception, there's no manipulation, there's no mirage. It is what it is. Generally speaking, and this is good to remember this, but generally speaking, the greater the validity, meaning do I stay true to the course in my argument, the greater the reliability. Can it be applied over different situations, different experiments, and come up with similar results? The greater the validity, the greater the reliability, the greater the truth or the reality of something. For example, science has many theories which are not true. In fact, most science is just people coming up with hypotheses. They got an idea, they make a hypothesis. In fact, in certain types of sciences, I don't even know that people are necessarily looking for truth. I think they're just trying to figure out, is my hypothesis right or not? So there's many things in science that are just theories that are not true. They're just theories. But in science, we also find there are laws and there are proofs. There's some information out there or phenomenon which is so valid. We measured honestly and objectively. We measured what we said we were going to measure, and it's reliable. We've tested it over with different experiments, different groups of people, and we're coming up with consistent results. That some things we can say with great confidence, this is true, this is authentic. That's why people fly airplanes. We know that if you get this tin can going at a certain speed, and you got the wings at a certain angle, the wingspans at a certain angle, that there's going to be a lift. It's after so many feet, there should be a lift, and that plane's going to go up in the air, and then it's going to be powered up into the air. I mean, that's why we fly airplanes, because it's reliable. It works. Barring some mechanical failure or geese flying into the engines or a hijack or something like that, that plane's probably going to get to where it's going. Same thing with riding roller coasters. We have studied different physical laws. We know that if you get certain speeds and certain, you can go through, you can do flips on a roller coaster, and you can go over curves and not fall off. And so there are some things where there's so much validity and so much reliability to our test and to our research, we can be very confident that it's true and authentic. Even when we discuss concepts and principles and arguments, there are some ideas that are so valid, we stay true to the topic. It's so reliable, it can be consistent over multiple applications, that we can have high degrees of certainty in the results or reputation of something. Another example I think of is from the scripture. It says that he will keep you in perfect peace if you keep your mind upon him. Now, we all know what it's like to fret and to worry and become anxious about things, and it just can eat us away, and we get ulcers and we're stressed out. But again, there are people who can truly say they learn to let go and let God take care of it. And those people can say there is a truth to that principle, that if I will trust God, he will keep me in perfect peace. There's millions of people who can testify to that. Okay. There's a truth to that. If I learn to let go, even if it doesn't go the way I want, even if the prayer's not answered the way I wanted it to be prayed or answered, there's still a sense of peace because I learned to keep my mind upon God and not trust in my own power. Thus, when we look at how valid the Bible is, it measures what it's supposed to measure, which is relationship between God and man, and how to have relationship between God and man. When we look at the validity of the Bible, when we look at the reliability of the Bible, how its promises and principles and encouragements over the centuries have been proven by millions and millions of testimonies of millions and millions of people, we can say with great confidence that the Bible is true and authentic in building a relationship with God. I want to switch gears as we kind of go toward the last part of this program. We've talked about, is the Bible reliable, valid, true? I want to just start about the beginning of God's creation and masterpiece. In John 1:1, it says that in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And again, we've mentioned this many times, but the Logos is the spoken word which gives order and structure. In fact, we get the word logic from Logos. God is the Logos. He's logical. God is logic. He's very orderly and structured. In fact, that's one of the arguments for God, the creator, is this world is so logical. Everything about it is so structured and ordered. That's because God is structure and order. He's logical. He's the Logos. And I want us to think, I've got the picture of the empty canvas here with the paint brushes, and the person's getting ready to do their artwork. But before the artist, before God actually put the first touch of paint to this painting, he already knew what he wanted to paint. He already, in his mind, knew the details. He knew the fine points. He knew every hue and shade. He'd arranged it in his mind. He knew he wanted to design a creation. He wanted to paint a painting that would bring him pleasure and satisfaction. He knew the end from the beginning. He knew the very first stroke. He knew what the very first stroke was going to be, and he knows the very final stroke before he puts the brush down and say, my work is completed. This was my creation in the beginning. So before he even began his creation, he knew the final product. Again, I've got a painting by Winslow Homer. Before he even put the first stroke of paint on this painting, Winslow Homer knew there were going to be two boys with model sailboats sitting by the sea, with sailboats in the background, with seagulls in the background, with little pebbles of rock in the foreground. He knew what this painting was going to look like. He knew what colors he was going to need. He knew what colors he was going to have to mix. He knew what kind of shades of colors he was going to have to do to create certain effects. So even before he started creation, he knew this was going to be the final product. Before Henry Ford ever made the first Model T, he had to, in his mind, create the wheel system, an engine system, a suspension system, glass. How are you going to roll up the glass, the wind, with the windshield wipers? What's going to wipe the rain off the windshield? Okay, so he saw the final product even before he began to create that final product, and that's the same thing with God. He knew what his creation was going to be even before he created it. So at the beginning of his masterpiece, God created the heavens and the earth. In fact, Genesis 1:1 says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, to me, it's interesting because when it says in the beginning, it indicates a time frame. I want you to think about this. That blank canvas, let's say there's an 11 by 14 canvas. There's this edge, there's this edge, there's the top edge, the bottom edge. That gives parameters to things. That painting just doesn't go on and on and on and extend outside the boundaries. That painting has boundaries, a top and bottom, a right and left boundary. So in the beginning indicates a time frame. Remember, God is eternal and infinite. He's not bound by time or space. But in order to create, God developed time and space. He put forth time and space. Now, we're bound by this frame of time and space. We just exist in this 11 by 14 canvas. God exists beyond that. But we are trapped in this 11 by 14 canvas in which he does his artwork. But God does allow himself to come inside this frame of time and space. He actually puts his hand and his eyes and his breathing, and he's going to work in this 11 by 14 canvas to do his creation. No man really understands outside the frame. We really cannot conceive eternity, which is the absence of time. We cannot conceive invisibility or infinity, which is the absence of space. We can't conceive that. In fact, think about two of the most common questions you probably have heard or maybe have thought, and especially in children, you see this. Two of the most common questions people ask. First one is, who made God? Have you ever heard that one before? Have you ever thought that question before? Who made God? That's because we live in this 11 by 14 canvas, and that's what we know. We know time and space. We cannot conceive of anything beyond time or space. So who made God? That's the concept of time. We know that within our framework here, within the frame of this painting, there's time and space. Everything has a beginning. Everything has an end. So we ask, who made God? Because we think God has an end. God has a beginning. The actual answer is no one made God, because God's eternal. He exists outside the concept of time. What's the second question you hear many times? Well, where's God? I can't see God. Where is he? Why can't I see God? This is about the concept of space. Again, we live in this 11 by 14 canvas. We think everything has to have a beginning and end. We think everything has to be visible. We think everything has to be sensual. We should be able to taste it and see it and touch it and feel it, smell it, hear it. But God's invisible because he exists outside of space. He's just like the air. He's just like the space between me and the camera. There's nothing I can see here. There's just empty space. But God's not material, and he doesn't need a place or space to exist. Genesis 1:2 says, now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So God starts off with a blank slate. It's a fresh canvas. It's an unspoiled and clean parchment of hydrogen and oxygen as his very breath and life hovered over this canvas of water. And I got 2 parts hydrogen and 1 part oxygen. What's water? H2O. 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen. It lets us know that is this canvas that God's going to begin to paint on, this that God's going to create things from. It's formless. It's empty. There's no form on it, but it is the deep surface of the water, and his spirit is hovering over that, almost like a hen hovering over her little chicks. He's hovering over it. And look what it says in Genesis 1:3. And God said, as he's hovering over this, he says, "Let there be light," and there was light. So we have a picture of the ocean and lights coming through. Without the light, the ocean would be deep and dark and we couldn't see anything. But now that there's light, we're starting to see color. We're starting to see waves. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. What's this? The Logos. He spoke it into existence. In fact, when God said, "Let there be light," when he said, "Let there be light," he defined light. He said light would travel at a certain speed. It could be bent. It could be absorbed by black holes. God defined light. So apart from the framework of time and space, so think of time and space as the frame around our artwork. The canvas is made of hydrogen and oxygen, H2O water, the deep, and God inserts illumination to the work of his hands. He speaks Logos. He spoke structure and order and said, "Let there be light." And again, light is defined. He defined the elements of light, what creates light. He defined, again, the principles of light when he said, "Let there be light." Now, from this verse, we learn that light exists apart from the sun. Sometimes in my readings, I've had people say, this doesn't make sense to me. How can there be light before God created the sun? Well, the obvious answer is light exists apart from the sun. Now, the sun sends forth light upon our planet Earth, upon our universe. It sends forth light, but we have to understand from the scripture that light exists apart from the sun. Just like light is a phenomenon that may radiate from the sun, just like it radiates from static electricity or lightning or striking a flint or striking a match, light exists apart from these sources because God is light and he's the source of all light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from darkness, Genesis 1:4. So now God adds the touch of light to the canvas, and there's a noticeable addition to his creation. So again, we look at the canvas here and the picture. There's the white canvas, and now there's a stroke of red that's being painted on it. And now we can differentiate between there was darkness and there was white, and now there's red. There was darkness, and now there's light. And I like this. It says, God saw the light, and it was good. And I'm sure there's many definitions for the meaning good in this concept. One of the things that jumps out at me is when it says God saw that it was good, it meant God looked at the light and it was fulfilling the purpose he intended. It was in perfect working order. It was logical. It fit a pattern. It fit a structure. It was orderly. It was fulfilling the purpose for which it was designed. It was good. It was in perfect working order. Think about when you get a new car. Now, I don't typically buy new cars because they're too expensive. But if you've ever bought a new car, isn't it a wonderful thing? Everything's good about it. It smells good. It runs good. It purrs like a kitten. There's no scratches. There's no dents. There's no defects, no flaws. Everything's still shiny. There's no dust, covering things. Everything just looks so clean. It's good, isn't it? It's good. It's running great. It's doing what it's supposed to do. And it's so nice. But then if you've ever bought a new car, it doesn't take long and you get that first dent, or maybe you get that first scratch. Oh, what happens when we start to hear a knock in the engine? What happens when the warning gauges start to come on? The car is no longer working logically or orderly as it was designed. The structure of it is not what it was designed to do. And now we have problems. It's no longer good. So what's the opposite of good? It means it's no longer in perfect working order. It's not completing its purpose. It's not running or functioning as designed. So the opposite of good, many times we refer to that as bad, or in the scriptures, it refers to it as evil. Evil just means it's not fulfilling the purpose it was designed to. It's not working as it was supposed to work. Now, I've got a couple pictures here. One of my favorite TV shows of all time is The Andy Griffith Show. Some of you may be familiar with that. And so here what we have is there's a character, Barney Fife, and Barney Fife, who of course is a very comical person in the show, buys a car off an old lady. You maybe have seen this episode, and he's so tickled with it because to him this car is great. It's perfect. It's shiny, looks good. He turns it on, it sounds good, and he's so excited because he's like, this car is perfect for me. This car is going to do what I want it to do. And so we see in this first picture here, Barney is so happy when he thinks his car is good and running smoothly. In fact, he invites his friends to take a ride. He's going to take a little afternoon ride with them, and they're going to go out and drive around and see the countryside. And of course, in the first picture, Barney has this kind of smug look of like, I'm so proud of this car. It's running so nicely. But it doesn't take long, and the car starts to have problems. You start to hear little knocks and dings, and things start to fall off, and it's making noises, and he has problems with the steering wheel. And before you know it, the car's broken down, and it's on the side of the road, and we see a scene where they have to try to push it back into town. And again, we see that in the second picture. You notice the difference. When the car's running good, Barney looks happy, maybe a little bit prideful even, and everything's going good. We look at the second picture, and he's starting to get a worried look. Something's not going right. It's not running right, and obviously it didn't. The car's broke down. That's not what a car is designed to do, is to be broken down on the side of the road. It's supposed to get you from point A to point B. So good is it's in working order. Evil or bad means it's not operating the way it's supposed to. Anyhow, Genesis 1:5, as we get ready to wrap up this program, God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Genesis 1:5. So God differentiated between light and darkness by calling light day and darkness night. Just like in this picture, we see a differentiation. There's white, and now we see blue. There's white and blue, light and darkness, day and night. I find it interesting that God organized his creation, and that light and darkness would be the foundation by which he would mark time and indicate mortality and the finite. Think about this. Light and day, light and darkness, day and night begin to mark time, which means everything has a beginning, everything has an end. Every day that we live, we only get so many days to live in this life. And the older you get, you realize the fewer days, the fewer sunsets, the fewer sunrises you're going to see. But that's a way that God began to mark time and show us that we're finite and that we're mortal. In order for his creation to have a beginning and an end, God laid forth the background hues of light and darkness, day and night. But when God saw it, it was good, it was logical, and it was purposeful. In conclusion, as we study the interaction of God with his creation, we can consider the collection of Holy Scripture, or the Holy Writings, which we call the Bible, as valid, reliable, and true. We also see that as the initial backdrop to his creation, God applies time and space, light and darkness, his spirit, which is his breath and life, hovering over the waters as a foundation upon which he will paint the rest of his artwork. And God's initial strokes of his creation are good. They're perfect, they're logical, they're purposeful, they're without flaw. And so we have begun to get into God's initial creation. And we will continue to explore that here on this program. I want to thank you for joining me with this episode of the Logos, the Life of Light, Love, and Logic. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to email me at thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. Again, that's thelogos.lightlovelogic@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. Again, thank you for joining us. Until next time, live the life.